Greetings, Race community. Brent coming in live with today's guest, Shana Hocking, who serves as founder and CEO of Hocking Leadership. Welcome, Shana.
Brent, I'm so glad to be here with you.
Well, we reconnected at the Case District 1 conference in Boston recently, and I said, I got to get you on the podcast. And so here you are. Thank you for agreeing to share your journey with our community today, many of whom you have connected with over the years, but it'll be a chance for them to learn a little bit more about your story. So why don't you take me back to junior year of high school? Who was that Shana? What was she into? And what led you to Columbia University?
Junior year of high school, Shana was working as an intern in a nonprofit, knew that I really wanted to do something to help other people, thought that I wanted to be a rabbi, thought I wanted to be a social worker, thought I wanted to be a writer, went to college with those aspirations. And in my first month when I was at school, I found development, and then I knew it was my dream career.
And where was junior year Shana Hocking?
I was born and raised in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Okay, so you're in Virginia. And what do you think sparked your desire to want to be in the impact space, to even at such a young age know that maybe that could be a part of your long-term career path?
I think some of it was just my family was always talking about the Hebrew word is tzedakah, to give back, to support others. That was a family value of ours in many different ways. And I grew up with that. It was just expected of us, but I also found joy in it. And I watched my family members find joy in it. So I found a cause that was important to me. I went all in. That's pretty much the story of my life in two sentences. Found a cause, went all in. And I just feel really fortunate that I was able to make a career of it.
I love it. And so tell me about your college journey. And it sounds like you had a side hustle as a fundraiser pretty much immediately.
I did. Well, I went to college on scholarship and financial aid. It played a really important role in my ability to go where I chose to go and take the path that I wanted to take. And I think that stayed with me in terms of my choice. Philanthropy was about creating meaning out of money, and money up until that point in my life had been probably more stressful and a source of challenge and difficult conversations. And philanthropy creates joy and power and opportunity and access. And I just felt like it was an opportunity for me to embrace that and to step into that and then to use my strengths to make that happen for other people. And I think that's really the joy of fundraising, is being able to say, I can help you achieve more than you ever thought possible.
How did that shape your college journey? And then as you started thinking about how to convert all of everything you shared into a first job out of college, like what was the path?
Well, I like to joke now that I spent a lot of time in the bursar's office trying to figure out how I was going to make this all work. I had 5 different jobs when I was in college. One of them was development. I cold called my way to an internship the summer before my junior year in college. Duke was in $1 billion campaign, and I wanted access to that kind of fundraising prowess. And so I cold called Bob Shepard, who was the AVP at the time. I asked him to hire me. Um, I said I was going to be in North Carolina in a few weeks and I could meet with him, which is the ultimate development move. And he hired me. And that's when I really knew that this was the path I wanted to be on. I specifically wanted to be in university fundraising. I knew I wanted to be director of major gifts when I grew up. I was 19 years old.
Nobody
So
says that, by the way.
I
Literally nobody
know,
says
I know, but it makes me feel so fortunate that I found this path so early on. And it's been, it was not easy to get there because I graduated at a time where many people fell into fundraising. They'd had an entire career before they came to fundraising. So you have this 21-year-old who knows with deep conviction that she's meant to be a major gifts fundraiser, not anything else. Major gifts, 6, 7, 8 figure fundraiser. And people are like, that's so cute, but you don't have any experience. So I was rejected from 100 jobs at really well-meaning and well-known institutions across the country. And so it wasn't that easy to get into higher ed fundraising as I had hoped with all the experience I had gained. But I was determined and I made it there. And that's informed how I hire and lead ever since then.
Tell me more about what at Duke struck you, or what along the journey made it really click where you knew with that specificity, you not only wanted to work in fundraising, higher ed fundraising, and major gift fundraising in higher ed? Like, was there a moment, a person, like what clicked?
I was exposed to so many different things when I worked there. This is some of the best training you can get. I worked in the annual fund, I worked in major gifts, CFR, student affairs. I helped open their Freeman Center for Jewish Life. So it gave me exposure to development across a campus. And I was able to start connecting those dots, right? 19 years old, and you're figuring out how to connect dots and what philanthropy does to do that, who the people are, who the players are at the table. Bob Shepard still is my mentor today, and he took a chance on me, but he also trusted me and he gave me really meaningful projects. I was looking up stuff in Dun and Bradstreet. I was creating ads to put on the buses so that the students could learn about the power of philanthropy and giving day for the seniors. So I think some of it comes from being able to create your own ideas and have the autonomy and the authority to do that, even when you're still really early in your career. And I felt empowered to say, this is what I think we can do even better for our profession, even then. And I do credit Duke with that experience.
As a fellow beneficiary of financial aid and a fellow hustler as a student, I have to ask if you were, I mean, you clearly, it had to be somewhat eye-opening given the background you described, uh, to get exposure to just the sheer amount of
Mhm.
wealth that is maybe felt like it was everywhere. When you're in the communities you're describing. And that was something I think, honestly, it took me a while to realize. I just was kind of naive and oblivious to it. But given the kind of work you were doing, there's no way you could hide from that. And so, I mean, clearly it didn't phase you. You leaned into it in a huge way, but were there any moments where you were just, I don't know, sort of awestruck by that aspect of the work?
Brent, that is a really thoughtful question. And I do think it takes our shared experience to have an understanding about the psychology of money when it comes to development. I talk about this a lot. It took me a long time to understand what that arc was. Um, what I understood was that money was power pretty early on, and having it created different kinds of power. But that power is not a bad thing. We make it like it's a bad thing. There were certainly times where I talked myself out of making the ask because the amount was higher than I could ever have imagined someone talking about. But I also use that as a way to help inspire other fundraisers to remind them this isn't our money and that our story is ours and we can't write the story for someone else. And this is how we create opportunity by being willing to really own our own story, but create a story for someone else that maybe they didn't see for themselves before. I don't think I could have had that kind of vulnerable conversation with my team members and my colleagues early on if I hadn't come from that shared experience that you're mentioning for us.
Yeah, and just even the fact that when you sort of grow up in an environment where it's all about, how do you save every penny you can? I mean, it sounds like philanthropy, generosity was a big part of your family, but obviously there's just this element of, working to make ends meet versus literally thinking about, hey, how can I give? What can not should I give, but where am I going to give? And what's my budget for giving? And just understanding like how common that actually is in the communities you're describing was for sure very eye-opening for me.
Yes, me too. I mean, I worked at Wharton for 8 years in my career. I'm pretty sure there's a stat out there that the most number of billionaires, came from Wharton. So I was exposed very early on to alumni who had incredible capacity to change the world through their businesses, through their philanthropy, through their values. And I took that responsibility really seriously.
Yeah.
And that maybe I'd been put into that position because I was uniquely qualified to help them create that meaning because of my own experience.
Well, before we get into Wharton, we have to go to the other end of the spectrum just a bit earlier in your career, which is showing up at the University of Alabama and being the director of advancement in the School of Social Work, which, to be honest, I didn't know the School of Social Work would have a director of advancement. Tell me
So
more. I mean,
Roll
what kind
Tide.
of, yeah, roll
It
tide.
was a
Okay.
Listen, it was a fantastic 5 years working in fundraising there. I learned so much about who I was as a person, who I was as a leader. I'm not an alumna. I moved there knowing zero people, knowing with deep conviction I wanted to be a fundraiser. They were just starting a campaign. Pam Parker, who was Pam Parsons at the time, she took a chance on me, hired me in, did the School of Social Work need a full-time fundraiser? I don't know, but I was determined to be successful in that job because I'd worked so hard. Remember, I got 100 rejections on the way to that job, determined to be successful, built relationships all across campus, in particular with my colleague who was the director of development for the College of Business, because there were a lot of alumni who were from the School of Social Work who were married to College of Business alumni, and creating capacity and opportunity across the campus has always been the way that I feel most motivated. But after being in the School of Social Work for about 2.5 years, I think they were like, Shana, you walk too fast, talk too fast. I don't know what to do with you. They moved me over to work as director of leadership gifts. I worked directly for the university president and the advancement vice president, Bob Witt and Pam Parsons Parker. It was probably the best job I've ever had in my career. I flew around the country meeting with alumni who had not been engaged, who didn't feel connected to the university, who had incredible capacity, and I got to help them start a history of philanthropy with their beloved alma mater.
Tell me about one or two of those visits. You had to have some really fun ones.
Oh my gosh, I had so many fun ones. I mean, because I was traveling around the country, they would expect something. I was coming from Alabama and I wasn't from Alabama. Um, I think the most meaningful visit that I remember was I was making a visit on behalf of my colleague at the university, said, while you're out there traveling, please go visit this alumnus from our college. He was young and his father had passed away. His father had been a major donor to the university. And, we were like, what might he want to do in terms of continuing this legacy that his father started? And I got to be the one to have that conversation with him. It was emotional, it was vulnerable, it was courageous on his part. He ended up setting up a cohort of scholarships in his father's memory. And I will never forget being in that capacity where he met those students for the first time. And every one of us in fundraising has some version of that story. We get to play a tiny role in legacy and honoring people's memories and honoring people's goals. And then he started a much larger legacy of philanthropy many years after that. So we also know that we're a part of something so much bigger than any one of us.
When that cohort was introduced, was there anything you were able to do from a stewardship perspective to connect him to that work or to those students?
Well, I didn't have Evertrue back then, so it would have been really helpful. But what we did at the time was to just set up a space for him to get to learn about who they were and to tell about his father. And the thing for me, and this is true of us in fundraising, I set all of this up, I created all of this, and then I moved away. I went to a next organization. I'm part of a dual career couple. Something else that's really important for me to talk about in advancement. How do you continue your career and growing your career even when you're part of a ambitious two-career couple? So I set that all up, and then I didn't really get to be at the table per se to see it happen. But so I wasn't in that room, but I can only imagine based on those stories what exactly happened as a result.
And so to have the best job of your career and then to move, why?
Well, my husband, he got his doctorate at the University of Alabama, which is what brought us there. And then, as we do when you have a faculty, you have to go on and do your residency, your postdoc. So we were living in Cincinnati for a year. I worked remotely for the University of Alabama well before the pandemic,
Wow.
and they took a chance on me to do that too. But I was traveling the country, so we ended up moving to Philadelphia. My husband, for him to work at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and then for me to work at the Wharton School. It was hard. It is hard to leave a job you love. And I think it teaches you a lot about how you can love many things in this profession and that you don't always know how it's going to turn out, but you have to believe that you're setting the path and making the right steps to get to where you're eventually meant to be.
But you had a great run at Wharton, 8 years. I'm sure just some tremendous memories and relationships there as well. What was the state of fundraising at Wharton? Was it a powerhouse when you got there? Were there material changes over those 8 years? I mean, I guess
Uh,
one thing is context-wise, you started in the depths of the financial crisis, which had to be pretty interesting.
I did. I started in 2009, and I don't think I really understood enough about the world at that point. Like I knew there was a financial crisis happening. I'd been at Alabama, and one of the alumnus that I kept in touch with was at Bear Stearns, and so I was like, "Oh, you're out of a job," but it was changing our whole world and our whole life, and I was still pretty early in my career at this time. I am amazed at how much we were able to do in the hardest time at the time in our fundraising world. And I learned a lot about how to hold space for people who are accustomed to living a life a certain way that are no longer able to live that life exactly that way. And also, there are a lot of people who have a lot of capacity already and still have to figure out how to find the right home for it. I was struck by how how much I did philanthropy education for Wharton alumni. They were running the business world. They were making decisions that changed all of our lives every day. But they didn't necessarily know how to give that money away meaningfully and authentically to their own values. That was the thing I remember the most about my time there was how meaningful it was to play that role.
And so your point is to maybe evolve from a transactional mode of giving, because I'm sure some of those people were giving, they're lobbing in money here and there, maybe even material amounts, but your point is maybe not in a way that was as intentional or well informed as they could be.
Yeah, I found great pride in going through that donor database and finding a $0 donor, right, who maybe was underrated but was already ahead of wherever we thought they were in that database and going to them and starting that history of philanthropy. Because in a place like Penn or any large institution, there are a lot of people doing this important work at the same time. You have to figure out how to carve out your own space if you want to be successful there. It requires being entrepreneurial, it requires being resilient. And that was how I was going to be able to make my career in a really large, beautiful, complex, messy organization like that.
Well, part of the other focus area niche that you found and developed was around women in leadership. And tell me more just about the state of affairs when you got there, maybe some of the milestones that you're really proud of as you advance that work.
Thank you. That is one of the things that I am proudest of. Wharton was raising a lot of money, but it was typically coming from men, alumni, and I think a lot of things had been tried before, as we often hear in development. Oh, we've tried that. It's not going to work here. And I credit my boss for me coming with an idea and saying, I want to do this. I want to figure out how to engage more alumni as volunteer leaders on our boards and philanthropists. It's going to look a little bit different than what we've been accustomed to doing. And I did hear, though, we've tried that before and it doesn't work, but I also heard yes. And if I hear a yes, Brent, I'm going to take that and do whatever I can with it. And so we developed an initiative called Wharton Women in Leadership. It ran for the remainder of my time there. We had women coming from around the country and around the world to these two luncheons that we would host a year, engaging the dean, engaging the president of the university, faculty. It was about learning, teaching, but it was also about preparing them for board and philanthropy. And we saw marked increases in the number of women sitting on boards and the number of women donors, particularly seven-figure donors during the time I was doing this initiative. And I want to tell you that I started this before I was a people leader in advancement. I think this is important because we think a lot about, I have to wait until I'm fill in the blank to be able to make a difference in our field. And my best message is to lead from where you are. Do not wait to fulfill the ideas that you have. Just find someone who will believe in you to let you try them.
And in your case, though, to do that, were you able to align that work with your existing goals and objectives, or did it essentially become just extra work for you on top of whatever it was you were doing?
Well, I think in today's parlance, it would be considered extra work, but back then it was probably considered a stretch assignment and
Yeah.
an opportunity to grow. It wouldn't have mattered to me at the time. I mean, any gift I closed was certainly counting toward my metrics or visits that I had. Um, I believed so deeply in this as an opportunity, both for the alumni themselves, but also for the school,
Yeah.
that even if it wasn't in my goals, it was what I wanted to do. So it was an additional project to my day job.
Well, what I love about the concept too is not only did it generate philanthropy, right? Unlock philanthropy. I bet many relationships were built among those women that just simply otherwise would have happened. And so I'm sure there had to be a professional network, social friendship development element of that as well.
Yes, it is very true. There's no one aspect of our work. It's so multifaceted. And I do keep in touch with a few of those women. They'll send me a note from time to time, either of their scholarship recipient that they're standing next to or something that they've, promotion that they've gotten in their career. And they'll mention, I was in touch with fill in the blank. So I do think that those relationships have continued over time.
Well, at this point, you pivot to Children's Hospital Philadelphia, which, as you shared, you maybe had some inside baseball, insight going on there. Just tell me about that move. And my sense is that's when you really did start to assume people leadership versus your individual contributor work.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'd been leading a team of 10 eventually at Wharton. By the end of my time, I'd been promoted a couple of times, was very fortunate to lead that team. And then when I went to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, I had told myself I was never going to be in academic medicine. I was going to be in higher ed for the rest of my life because that's what I was going to do. That's what we do. And being at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, my boss at the time had moved over from higher education. And so that was an opportunity to think that this could be possible. And the task was great. We were a team of 15, and I had aspirations to grow that team to 50, which I did over 5 years. Put into structure, things that hadn't existed before, clarity of roles, clarity of career ladders, clarity of what it means to ask and how to engage other faculty in those asks, and built something really meaningful. And I led that team through the pandemic, which again, none of us could have predicted that. Working in medicine during the pandemic was really intense. And I do feel, I am someone who feels like, you're in moments for learning. And I do feel like I was called to that moment to lead that particular team through that particular time.
And along the way, you start your work in content, which my guess is was sort of the slippery slope that helped spark your entrepreneurial endeavor, which we'll talk more about. But just tell me about what inspired you to start writing, both in Fast Company and HBR, but also LinkedIn, just in general, what you've learned through the just habit of content creation.
Yeah. So 18 years ago, I only know because LinkedIn reminds you, I first started posting on LinkedIn. 18 years ago in our profession, nobody is posting on LinkedIn. As a matter of fact, I would go to case conferences and in the hallway, they'd be like, I read what you posted. I was too afraid to like it. I still hear that some days today. But
I used to go, while you were doing that, I was going to case conferences with presentations titled LinkedIn for Advancement. And I'd like demo LinkedIn and people be like, this is amazing. What's it cost? And I'm like, it's free. And they're like, no way. And it was like, I felt like a LinkedIn like demo guy for a couple of years there, but it was, people wanted to learn.
they did. I think our profession has been taught for so long that the mission and the brand is far over anything else. And what I saw, and I think you too, was that LinkedIn was an opportunity to amplify that mission and brand with our own voice. And so I'm the kind of person who reads hundreds of articles a week, and I was sending them to my friends, and my friends are like, please stop sending me articles. But they love me, but like they don't want to read the articles. And so LinkedIn for me was a chance to just share it with the world. And if someone wanted to read it, great. So that's how I really started, was just sharing things that I thought were of interest with a little bit of commentary on them. And then when that started picking up traction, Then I started to write my own content, my own short and long form. And then when that started to pick up traction, I had aspirational goals always. My biggest goal was to get into HBR. There was a long path to get there. I wrote for Fast Company, as you mentioned. I was very proud of that. Because these were leadership lessons that I learned in advancement, but they were showing up in business publications, and that was a priority for me. I've always wanted to tell our story, our development story, on the biggest possible stages to bring awareness and respect to our profession. I'll say that doing this kind of content creation and sharing over my career didn't always win me fans in my day job. There are lots of fans, liking and commenting and supporting posts, but I think our profession took a long time and is still taking some time to come around to how we can be multifaceted and we can embrace that.
And you think that was just jealousy, or they wanted to be posting and were nervous about doing so, or
I think it was a lot of nervousness, right?
yeah.
Like, ooh, what's she going to say? We don't get to approve that. We don't even get to see it first. And how's that going to be interpreted? But what I had to keep doing was keep writing for the one person I was going to help that day, because I would also get messages or DMs, and people would say, "Thank you for telling the story. I can't like this post. My boss might see it, but thank you for creating space for me to feel like I'm less alone." And every day, despite all the scars, I kept showing up to write for that one person.
And so when was the seed planted for your book, One Bold Move a Day?
So in 2019, I started writing the first draft of what I thought was going to become my book. And I had about 35,000, 40,000 words. And then I paused there and started shipping out inquiries to agents, which is the pretty traditional path for, a nonprofit, nonfiction book. And I got rejected by every agent I submitted to, 30 agents probably ish in total. Last rejection came on the day we all went home in March of 2020. And I was pretty crushed because I had this dream and I wanted to see it happen. And then we all quickly were like, how do we take care of our families? How do we take care of our teams? And all attention was really put onto that. But what I heard very quickly was the burden, especially on women, on trying to figure this all out. And so I felt like I couldn't wait for someone else to give me permission to tell this story that was going to help other women or leaders in general. And so in May of 2020, I started a daily podcast. It was a 6-minute daily podcast called One Bold Move a Day. And that was where I was just going to push out all the things I wanted to be able to help our profession and leaders everywhere. And after doing that, I got to about 100 episodes. I was like, it's time for me to go back to that book dream. It's time for me to get that off the shelf and try again. And now the idea was much clearer. It wasn't really one bold move a day when I started. It was what I like to call a cousin. But once I knew it was one bold move a day, I pushed it back out there again. And that's what led to the book deal, which I got in 2021.
And so what's been, I don't know, an unexpected surprise of that journey? Because there are some things you had to sort of expect and it's happened. But what are some of the unexpected benefits or challenges, you name it?
Uh, well, I mean, writing a book was my dream. The way it's been received was a dream I couldn't have expected. I turned in my manuscript for One Bold Move a Day on December 1st, 2021, and resigned from my job to start this company with 0 clients, with
That's a
just
big
another
day.
deep. Yeah, it was a really big, talk about a bold move. It was, again, just a deep-seated conviction in what I could do for our profession. So, um, you know, I still get letters from people who are just finding One Bold Move a Day for the first time. I got one just this last week. I was traveling. This woman told me that her husband bought the book for her, and how it was helping her through a really difficult time in her career. I could never have dreamed that that was going to happen. And it is an honor and a privilege to know that it's helping people. That was my only goal. This wasn't supposed to be my day job. It was supposed to just be the way I could help other leaders as best as I possibly could.
And so tell me about the vision for starting your own firm. You had grown up in this industry, you knew the consulting landscape and the leadership development landscape, but like every entrepreneur, you saw a gap. You saw an opportunity that was unfilled in the market. What was that? And is it still that today?
Yeah. Uh, I really knew that the way that we were going to get the best of our organizations was by supporting our people. I've said 100 times over, invest in people and results follow, invest in people and results follow. And I think our profession believes that in its heart, but it hasn't always known how to put resources toward that and hasn't always known how to put structure toward that. And then there are some people who feel like we don't have time for that because we just have to raise money. And my philosophy is if you do this, you'll raise more money because you'll start to tap into this unknown of what people need and how to show up for them and how to show up, they can show up for our donors. And so I saw this as something that I wanted to do, but it got clearer after about 2 years in business because when I first started, I was doing a little bit of everything, as many entrepreneurs do. My firm was doing fundraising consulting. I did some philanthropic advisory for ultra high net worth families who had had me quote across the table from them as a fundraiser and then wanted me next to them at the table. And as I was doing all these wonderful things and, promoting One Bold Move a Day on the road, I had this realization that the whole reason I wanted to do this was to get back to support higher education advancement. And that's what I wanted to do, and this was how I was going to do it. And so then really went all in summer 2023 on this vision.
And so if I were to ask you today what your qualification criteria is or how you sort of know that there's a problem that needs solving and you could be the right fit when you're speaking with a peer, a prospective client, like what is the sweet spot engagement for you today? And what is the before and after that you hope to deliver?
Uh, I think that the university advancement vice presidents who resonate most with what we're doing are really caring deeply about who they lead and how they lead, and not just the fundraising metrics they achieve. And because they understand how it's all interconnected. And then the before is often good to great, right? These aren't necessarily broken teams or broken organizations. These are great leaders who understand that it is okay to have someone to help you to achieve your vision, to have someone to stand on the side and go, hey, I noticed this. Here's how we might do this differently. Here's what's not being heard when you're saying that. Here's how we can put together this plan for you to activate to go reach those organizational priorities. Because leadership and fundraising are deeply interconnected, but to me, it all starts with leadership. So the leader has to understand that will be the unlock for their team.
One of the things I see in advancement leadership, maybe it's all leadership, is this dynamic where you are expected to exude confidence, positivity, charisma, clarity, all of these types of characteristics. And on the inside, you're like super confused, frustrated, burnt out, worn out. And so there's this sort of dynamic of just how you present to the world, to the team, versus how you actually feel. I would imagine in your role, you get a window into what's really going on.
Totally. Because people feel safe. They don't have to put on that whole posture that they might when they're out in front of the world, in front of their president, in front of their trustees. I take that space so seriously because these are great leaders who have a strong vision and they're human and they're willing to be human. And I think that's a differentiator because it's there's space for the and. I talk about this in One Bold Move a Day. I talk about it in my work. None of us are one thing. We are multifaceted. And there is joy and challenge. You can be grateful and ambitious. You can have a strong vision and have a hard effing day. And all of that can coexist.
What are some examples that you feel like the whole industry should know about of either specific leaders, if you're comfortable naming, or specific organizations that you think are extremely well run or have started to deliver the kind of human capital development, leadership that you think generates not only better philanthropic outcomes, but just a better experience for people in the workforce?
Yes, well, I can think of many examples. I do want to be mindful about calling out anyone to the detriment of someone else. But what I talk about is that the leaders that I work with are redefining leadership and they're redefining our profession. They are willing to say that we did great work up until this point, and what's required of us now is going to look different. And the systems that worked in the past are not necessarily the systems we're going to need in the future. And we're willing to break them a little bit in order to build them back stronger. That's a brave leader in our industry. And I am fortunate to stand alongside many of them who are doing that right now.
Talk to me about the tension around investing, growing, developing the existing talent versus at times needing new perspective. Some people might say to upgrade talent, whatever you want to describe it as. How do you think about that balance in this industry where I would say in general, there's probably more of a stick with what we've got mentality than you might find in the for-profit sector, for example. That's a big generalization, but just what are you seeing or what are you feeling around investing in growing versus replacing?
I love this question because I think our industry has often relied on, well, this has worked for us, so we're going to keep doing it. I think it sometimes depends on it if a leader grew up in the organization that they're leading or if they came in new, to answer your question about how they feel about bringing in new or cultivating what you already have. But I think most great leaders are doing a combination of both of these because we have to honor where we've been, right? We have to say that we've done great things, and I wonder if we could do it this way now. But we have to build on that history. If a leader comes in and tries to break everything, they're not going to be successful. So it has to be an and. But I find that the leaders who are, and in the Bold Blueprint, our research study, we did find that many of the women vice presidents in particular had to go to another organization in order to get that VP role. So we know that this is, we have this data that we know this is happening. And I don't have the exact data, but I'm going to posit that those leaders are more likely to bring in someone from the outside too, because they already know the value that they're bringing and the importance of having multiple perspectives at any one table.
And you wrote an article in HBR this year about being sort of the new person in a legacy culture.
Yeah.
There are people listening right now who are thinking, I am the new person in a legacy culture. So what's the TLDR? Or eventually go read on that one.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, it's based on my experience in our profession of showing up to an organization I didn't graduate from, right? I wasn't an alumna, but I wanted to show that I could care about and be successful in this institution. I've been in multiple places where I was the only non-alumna, and you kind of have to prove yourself, and it can be really tough. But you don't have to prove yourself to the detriment of your own values, and you don't have to assimilate to the detriment of those either. But there's a dance. Again, how do I honor what's been done so
Sure.
that you can hear my ideas for what we want to think about and could be? And I did write that, I mean, in HBR, but for our profession, because I think that we can't do things the way we've always done them before. It's just not going to keep working anymore.
Well, especially not in this AI transformation that we're living through. And this isn't meant to be an AI podcast per se, but I do want to know just what you're hearing, if anything, among the leaders you're working with, because I would imagine that the drumbeat they're starting to feel here from their boards is getting louder and louder. And there are ways that AI can be applied to drive efficiency in every part of the organization. From, certainly like how do we survey and make sense of the feedback, right? From an employee happiness perspective, employee engagement, to the way that we write a proposal, right? I mean, every aspect of the work will be redefined. But again, higher ed is not usually the first mover in these regards, but I'm curious just what you're seeing.
Yeah, the organizations that I work with are all grappling with how to integrate AI into their workflow and their workforce. And I've seen things done a little bit differently across campuses. I had someone say to me yesterday, if you've seen one higher ed advancement team, you've seen one higher ed advancement team, and it made me laugh. Um, Several of the organizations are integrating this into the goals for the executive team, which I think is really powerful, right? You measure it, you're going to see outcomes. And what those goals are slightly different. How are we using this as individuals? How are we using this collectively? I think that I think about this in the same way I thought about social media a long time ago. Oh, are we going to share we're going to connect with our alumni on these social media platforms?
Right.
Are we going to share about this? And I mistakenly thought that was going to be for the next generation and not my problem. Haha. But I think that we can't afford to do that right now. Our organizations have to figure out how we're going to embrace it, and we have to be willing to be imperfect. And this is really hard because we're accustomed to having everything all wrapped up in a bow
Right.
the way that we do it.
Yeah, I suspect there's some sort of Maslow's hierarchy. Maybe we can come up with a giving pyramid analogy, but there's sort of this fundamental question of like literally, does my team have access to these tools? Yes or no?
Mm, yeah.
Then if they have access, have they had basic training on these tools? Yes or no? And then if they've had basic training, are they using it consistently? Yes or no? And I think once you get to that layer, what I'm seeing is that, it's changed so fast. And in every cycle, there are early adopters, and then there are folks that are going to be, later to the party. But what you're starting to see among the folks that have access, have been trained, and then are using it regularly, the top 10% versus the bottom 10% within that group, like there are just some remarkable stories emerging from the top
Mm,
10% that when highlighted and reinforced to everybody else becomes really inspiring. And I do think there's this element of, making sure, by the way, there are some cultures where people are like using it quite fluently, but trying to pretend like they're not because they can get, 8 hours of work done in two and nobody's the wiser. So like we don't want that, right? We want our 8 hours of radical efficiency that drive more philanthropic outcomes, right? And hopefully
yes.
reduce the workload on the menial stuff. But I feel like that's sort of identifying the early adopters and then cataloging those stories and sharing them inside the organization is really a key opportunity right now for every org, but definitely within the advancement landscape.
Yeah, as you were talking, the examples that you were just spouting off the top of your head, I thought could be so helpful because it's hard for people to picture something that they've never done.
Right.
You have the ability to see that. That's part of what made you successful to this, this far as an entrepreneur. So even just sharing those examples could be, hey, let's get a working group around and do that one. And
Yeah.
that's the step. That's where they make that start.
Yeah, and I say that because I have shared my own version of those before and after examples on the case circuit and some of the conferences that I go to. And having, like you said, you go to one and you've seen one, having a group of people in a room that are in the same industry, in the same functional part of a university, sometimes with the exact same job titles and the same amount of work experience, completely different levels of AI literacy, fluency, whatever you want to call it. But then when people see it, they all get excited. And it's
Yeah.
just sort of finding a way to create a showcase to celebrate the folks that are leaning into it and creating better donor experiences or more staff efficiency. And then in doing so, bringing along the rest of the organization.
Love it.
So as you think about where you go from here, you took that entrepreneurial leap 3+ years ago now, almost 4 years ago. Where do you want to be 4 years from now? What are you excited about?
Oh gosh, my chief operating officer is going to love that you asked this because he's always challenged me to think 18 months or more out. So, the team has grown since I've started. I have aspirations to continue to expand the team. I believe that this is the most important work that I can focus on right now to strengthen our profession. And I'd like to be able to do that with more universities and colleges. Um, I'm working on aspirations for my second book, which I hope to be able to share more about soon, and to, again, directly affect our profession. Uh, as you already asked, I started doing this when I was 18 years old.
Yeah.
This is what I meant to do. It looks a little bit different than what I thought I was going to be doing when I was 18, but I really think we work in the best profession in the world. And I want to lead us through this transformation and transition time with strength and compassion, and to be ready for this generational shift that I see in leadership and development and alumni relations.
I love it. Shana, thank you for joining. I'm so glad we reconnected. I'm happy
Me
for
too.
you that you're in such a great spot after the journey that you shared. It's really inspiring. And if you're listening and you haven't connected with Shana on LinkedIn since she started posting 18 years ago, today's the day. So just reach out, tell her you heard her on the Raise podcast, and check out her books and articles, and you'll see it all right there in her profile. And I hope, Shana, that you build some new relationships following this.
Brent, thank you for all you do for our profession.
You bet. All right. Thanks, everybody. And with that, I'm going to close today's episode with Shana Hocking, who serves as founder and CEO of Hocking Leadership. Thanks, Shana, and take care, everybody.